Hi everybody, Pastor Angela here. Welcome to our first lesson for your small group time. I hope you guys are having a good time meeting with your small groups, however you guys have decided to meet. So tonight we are talking just briefly about the New Testament. So if you were with us last year, we spent a lot of our year in the Old Testament. So today we are moving on to the next big chunk of the Bible. So just by way of review, again, if you were with us last year, you might remember that the Old Testament has 39 books total. The New Testament has how many? 27 books in the New Testament for a grand total of 66 books of the Bible. So what can we expect to find in these 27 books of our New Testament? Well, you might remember from last year that in our Old Testament, we started at the very beginning of time, and we learned a lot about who God is and about God's character. We also learned about the story of Israel, the story of God's people, how God established those people, the way that those people grew as a nation, and the way that God continued to be faithful to those people, even and especially in those times when his people were not especially faithful to him. Well, in our New Testament, it's the New Testament because God is up to something new. And that new thing comes through Jesus Christ. So our New Testament starts with our 4 Gospels, which are going to tell us the story of Jesus, all about his life, his ministry, his teachings, and about his death and about his resurrection. And in addition to learning about Christ and his life and his sacrifice for us, we'll also learn about the early years of the Christian church. So following Jesus' death and resurrection, his followers get together and try and figure out how to continue to live their lives in the way that Jesus taught them. And so we are going to see them as they struggle to figure that out. So all of these books were written and collected by members of the early church in the decades following Jesus' life on earth. And all of these books were originally written in Greek. So our Old Testament was originally written in Hebrew. All of these 27 books are written in Greek in the New Testament. That just happened to be the language that was spoken most prevalently throughout the area that the early church was being established in. So here are our 27 books of the New Testament, and these books fall into 4 different types, 4 different categories, 4 different genres. Like I said, we start with our 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And in our second video that you'll watch with your small group, we're going to talk a lot more in depth about those 4 books specifically. And like I said, these 4 books tell us all about who Jesus was, what he taught, and the meaning behind his life, his death, his resurrection. Next, we have a book that is kind of like the historical narratives that we saw in the Old Testament. So the book of Acts will tell us an awful lot about the workings of the early church, the different things that happened as the church was being established, and kind of most importantly, the way that the Holy Spirit was working throughout that whole time. Our next set of lessons in kind of late October, early November will be all about the book of Acts. We'll spend a good amount of time talking about the early church then. Next, the bulk of our New Testament, the next 21 books, are all letters. So all of these letters were written usually from a person to a church that had been established throughout the Mediterranean. And we call these letters epistles. That's just kind of the fancy word that we use for these letters that were written. And we will talk more about this later in our confirmation curriculum, but for now, just know that these letters give us a lot of information about the challenges that the new church was facing. And they also help us to work through some of the theological questions that come up as people were trying to figure out, okay, so we're Christian and we're living in the world. How do we go about doing that? How do we best follow Jesus in the midst of everything else that's going on? And finally, our New Testament ends with the book of Revelation. Now, you've maybe heard things from this book before. It has a bunch of crazy imagery that all has to do with an ultimate battle between good and evil and the end of the world, and all kinds of crazy stuff happens. We will talk more about the book of Revelation later, but for now, just know that it kind of falls into its own category. And that category is apocalyptic literature. The book of Revelation isn't the only book out there that talks about, this ultimate battle between good and evil and the end of the world. In fact, maybe you remember from last year, the book of Daniel in the Old Testament, the last half of Daniel also is this sort of apocalyptic literature genre. So like I said, we'll talk more about Revelation a little bit later in the year. So while the Old Testament covers thousands of years of history, the New Testament is actually pretty short and sweet by comparison. The timeline that it covers is really only about 150 years or so. So again, we begin with our 4 Gospels, and 2 of our Gospels, Matthew and Luke, begin with the story of Jesus's birth, the story that we talk about at Christmas, right? Well, we think that Jesus was born sometime around 4 BC. That's kind of our best guess. Our other 2 Gospels, Mark and John, kind of skip ahead, and they begin with the story of when Jesus is baptized by John the Baptist, about 30 years later. So after we learn about Jesus's earthly ministry, we get the book of Acts, which covers about 30 years, the first 30 years of the Christian church. Our epistles are then written, kind of in the next 50 years or so after that. And then the book of Revelation is written last, we think. And like I said, that kind of talks about ultimate battles and good and evil and the end of the world. So Revelation just kind of is vision casting into the future. So just to compare our New Testament with the Old, again, you might remember from last year, the Old Testament, a lot of it was written after the fact, right? It was more about the oral tradition, the stories that got told from generation to generation that were then eventually written down in the form that we find them now. Well, by comparison, the New Testament was written down pretty quickly. The epistles, the letters that we read, are all first-hand accounts. These are letters that were written in real time to real churches that were facing real questions. So that was written down as it was happening. Our Gospels and the book of Acts were written down a little bit after the fact, but they were still written really within 50, certainly 100 years of the events that they talk about. And one of the big reasons that the Gospels even got written down in the first place was that a lot of the original disciples, the followers of Jesus that actually traveled with him when he was going around teaching and healing and doing all of his ministry, a lot of those disciples started to die. And so their stories and their remembering of Jesus' teaching was dying with them. So they wanted to make sure that all of this stuff got written down so that it would be preserved for later generations. All right, well, that is our very quick overview of the New Testament. Like I mentioned in the next video that you watch from me, we'll be talking about the 4 Gospels a little bit more in depth. And you guys will have a chance to do some reviewing and discussing with your small groups with both this video and the next. Well, I hope you guys have a good time tonight, and we will see you soon. Thanks, guys.